Okay, so now what we're going to do, since we've spent some time looking really closely at the anchor standards and talking about the anchor standards, is we're going to dig into the appendices just a little bit. And it's one thing that I found it's really important to really understand the Common Core state standards. In fact, I don't know what a better name for it is, but when I hear appendix, I think unnecessary or secondary, and really these appendices are really absolutely necessary for understanding the Common Core and for answering a lot of the questions that come up about the standards themselves. So just kind of a brief overview of what's in each of the appendices. Appendix A has supplementary information on reading, writing, speaking, and listening and language, as well as a glossary of key terms. And this is the place where you can go to get answers to a lot of the big questions that come up. So when I work with a lot of teachers, they have questions like, where is poetry in the Common Core state standards? And that's directly addressed in Appendix A. And they also ask questions like, why is informational writing, argumentative writing, and narrative writing separate when in the real world students or people kind of blend those together? And that's directly addressed in the appendix also. So Appendix A is really valuable and important, and we want to spend some time working closely with that. It does talk a little bit about text complexity, but where it really digs into text complexity, and this is a phrase I know we hear all the time when it comes to Common Core, that's where we want to go to Appendix B. So Appendix B is a list of text exemplars that illustrate the type and range and quality of text that should be taught at each grade level and in each content area. And then finally, the third appendix, Appendix C, which is something that I personally haven't spent much time with yet, but it's some writing samples from students, meaning what they would say, showing kind of annotated writing samples showing adequate performance. For me, I'm not going to be ready for Appendix C until I really have more implementation of the Common Core in my classroom, and I have some samples from my students. So what we're going to do today, or now, is focus on Appendix B, which has to do with text complexity. So we're going to do an activity to really dig into text complexity and talk about these exemplar texts. The reason why I started thinking about how we could work with Appendix B actually came from an experience I had with the teacher. A teacher came to me and said, my principal thinks that the first step in implementing the Common Core is to buy all the texts that are listed in Appendix B. And that's not what Appendix B is meant to be for at all. These are text exemplars. They're the types of text that we should see at each grade level. So I started to think about the best way to kind of analyze this and use it in our instruction, and to look at where we are meeting the requirements for text complexity and where there's some gaps, where things are missing. And so I came up with this process, which is actually a process that I have used for years because I teach a senior AP English class. And essentially, that course does what the Common Core does. They don't tell you which text you have to teach, but there's a description from the College Board of the type and range of texts you should be teaching. So I developed this process out of something I had kind of just done informally for quite some time. So when it comes to text complexity, the Common Core talks about 3 different ways to measure text complexity: the quantitative measure, the qualitative measure, and the match to reader and task. So quantitative is what we have traditionally used to measure text complexity, things like Lexile scores, having to do with sentence length and word length and some of those more objective measurements. The quantitative measure has to do with looking at the more kind of nuanced, less objective measurements of a text, things like the levels of meaning or the sequencing of a text. We can look at how complex a text is based on what it's going to take for students to actually read that text. And then the final measure is the match to reader and task, and that has to do with your particular specific students and whether or not this text is matched to those students. So it really acknowledges, and I love this, is one of the best things about the Common Core, is that it acknowledges teachers as part of the process of measuring whether or not a text fits students, moving beyond just objective measures like a Lexile score. So what I gave to each one of you is part of the Appendix B. It's not the whole thing, because the whole thing actually includes samples of these text exemplars, but today we're just going to be working with the table of contents, because that's a place to begin to start talking about what's represented in this document itself. So the first couple of pages just have an introduction, some more information about measuring text complexity, and then after that it moves into, by grade level and content area, a list of text exemplars. So for example, I'm looking at page 8, which has grades 6 through 8 text exemplars, and it's broken down by stories, drama, poetry, and then informational text for English language arts, which you can see there, and then informational text for history, social studies, informational text for science, mathematics, and technical subjects. So it honors that we're going to be doing different types of reading in different disciplines. So here's the process that you'll be going through as you're analyzing these text type. So the first thing you'll do is just spend some time reading and discussing the introduction to Appendix B, and you'll want to be working for this with people who are from your same grade level and content area. That's why we've grouped you that way for this activity. So then you'll go to your grade level and discipline area in the table of contents. Look at the text exemplars for your area. Now you're not going to have time today to discuss all of those, and you're probably not going to recognize all of those. So you want to start with the ones you do recognize. You can practice this process and then bring it back to your schools or whoever you're working with for further professional development time. So you'll talk about, first of all, you're going to start by looking at the title, the author, the origin, and the time period and the type of texts. So this list is meant to represent the range of text. So we're going to think about the background, where it comes from. And then discuss complexity. So how would you characterize the qualitative nature of that text, the quantitative, and then the match to reader and task for your particular students. And then this is where it comes into looking at your grade level, brainstorms other texts like it based on the information above. Now double check to make sure they're not listed at another grade level, because that's explicitly stating it should be listed at that grade level. And then talk about whether or not that text type is represented in your curriculum. In that list of other texts like it, do you have that at the grade level? Do you teach this specific one or another like it? And if not, kind of mark it as something you want to consider in the future. So here's an example. I went through this process for 9th to 10th grade English language arts. So I started with the Odyssey, because I know the Odyssey, I've taught the Odyssey, I figured I could come up with most of the information for it. So the title is the Odyssey, the author is Homer, the origin is Greek mythology, and it was published near the end of the 8th century BC, and the type of text is an epic poem. So that gives me kind of a background on this text type. As far as the complexity, for qualitative, I would rate this pretty high as far as the qualitative dimension. The structure is more complex because it begins in media res and jumps back and forth between the story of Odysseus and his son Telemachus. So it doesn't have the traditional chronological story structure, and students struggle with kind of moving back and forth. So that's pretty high. Language complexity, it's definitely high. There's a lot of figurative language. The language is archaic. And the knowledge demands are pretty high too, because you have to know a lot about Greek customs and characteristics of Greek mythology. It has a high level of intertextuality because there are also references to the Iliad and other Greek myths. As far as quantitative goes, I just found this by looking it up. There are lots of online places where you can go. So this is 1130. They actually place it at the low end of the 9th to 10th grade band according to Common Core Appendix A. So they would say that's low end for 9th and 10th graders. And then I would say that this text is really not easily matched to my current 10th graders. They would need a lot of support in connecting to this text and a great essential question in order to navigate it. I have a few who would embrace this as a challenge, but the majority would give up if I just put this in front of them. So they're going to need, even though Common Core says this is low end for 9th and 10th grade, my students are going to need a lot of support at this point in time in reading this text. So some others like it, the Iliad, Ramayana, Epic of Gilgamesh, the Aeneid, Metamorphoses, the Inferno, Beowulf. So there I'm looking for epic poems that come from about the same time period that I think are going to be the same demands. And ultimately this text type is not represented in my 10th grade curriculum. It's listed at the 12th grade level for this Boise School District, and I've always taught it at the 12th grade level. There is one Greek drama, Antigone, at the 10th grade level, but there are no epic poems, and there's nothing that I would say is the equivalent of this poem. So I would need to be making some shifts to make sure that this text type is represented. Okay, so it is kind of a long process, and it requires some discussion among yourselves, and it's great if you have laptops for this, so you can look up some of the text and do some research. And again, you'll just be beginning this to get used to the process that you can then continue later on.